And maybe it's a social minefield in many ways. We don't know what the outcomes of this really are going to be. Antoinette?
Well, I guess we need to also look at what do we really mean by quality time. It doesn't need to be volumes of time, and I think all parents can find a way to really invest in quality time or specialness that builds a good relationship with their teenager. That's not to the exclusion of the other things that teenager has come to enjoy, which is the high salary that gives them their holidays once a year or more often. And I think that we need to be a little bit insightful about how that balance works, and it's not an all or nothing.
Do we have? Was there another question up the back? Yeah.
The gentleman down the front touched on it already, but I'm a fan of Nip Tuck, which is a really trashy TV show, and probably comes from watching bad soap operas as a teenager myself. But there's a really wonderful line in one of the series where it says, when we realise that we can't make carbon copies of our children, we'll be a lot better off. And is not part of the problem the fact that we are imposing a sense of ourselves on individuals who are thinking for themselves and acting for themselves? And it brings me back to my thoughts as a teenager. I would always have these arguments with my mother, who was mainly the one at home. My father commuted quite a distance to work, so I really saw him. And my refrain was always, "Mum, I'll make mistakes, but I'll learn." And it was true. I ended up agreeing with what she would tell me from the onset, but I think that sense of journey, taking those steps yourself, was very important as well. Does anyone want to comment on that?
How important is that sense that you've made the journey yourself and you've made your own discoveries, Don?
I think one of the worst mistakes you can make is to try and turn your children into an absolute carbon copy of yourself, because they have to be given freedom. They have to be allowed to sort out their own development. They have to be given the guidance, they have to be given the rules, they have to be given the structure, but not the overwhelming, absolutely ironclad expectation that they're going to turn out exactly like mum or like dad or like anybody else. So I think we're on a really bad road if we say to our kids, either explicitly or implicitly by the ways in which we interact with them, you've got to turn out exactly like me. These are emerging, often highly intelligent, mature young people who are going to sort out their own destinies, and they're going to make their own decisions. And if it's the carbon copy of mum or dad, that's a surefire recipe for rebellion. So I think we have to be very, very careful not to go down that track.
And also not to give the message that your love and approval of your adolescent is contingent on the choices that they make. We need to genuinely respect their right to make choices, but also to allow space for that responsibility that comes with that they do make choices and there are consequences, and we can be there to support and be available for them. We don't have to approve of or have made the same choice.
We're just approaching almost the end of our time, but there's just one issue that we haven't really touched on yet, and that's substance abuse, which is something that's binge drinking is throughout the media. There's a lot of concern about teenagers in that respect. Don, I just wanted to put that to you because I know it's a specialist area of yours. How common and how serious is substance abuse among teenagers?
Well, I think we have to distinguish between substance abuse and substance use. And I think, unfortunately, that substance use is reasonably common. I'm not too sure that it translates into substance abuse to any greater rate than it did a decade ago or 2 decades ago or whatever. Binge drinking is perhaps a bigger problem. It's related to a whole range of things. It's certainly related to stress, for example. And one of the real difficulties about binge drinking, unfortunately, is that there are quite distinct health consequences down the track. The biological problems associated with binge drinking start early, and sometimes they can become irreversible quite quickly. And I think binge drinking is going to be an emerging problem that we really have to be aware of, and we have to be sensitive to. How we get at it, I think, is a rather more complex issue. Unfortunately, parents, to some extent, can assume some level of responsibility, because I think there's an issue of modelling here, where parental drinking habits will model the habits of young people. I think one of the other issues is one that I think a number of us raised quite early on in tonight's discussion, and that's a greater level of ambiguity about what is acceptable, what's allowable and what's not. I don't think, in my adolescence, binge drinking was a real issue because getting anything to drink was an exceptionally difficult problem. Now, we sometimes had quite creative solutions to this, which led us into other sorts of trouble, but nonetheless, I mean, things like, raw spirits are fairly readily available now, and I'm not making any moral judgment here at all. I'm making no moral statement. But what I am saying is that we do have an issue with things like binge drinking that I think we're going to have to address, or we're going to have a real health consequence 20 years down the track.